Hello and welcome to the Honest Not Perfect podcast. My name is Suzanne Ellingham and I'm the director of Source Events, the platform that helps connect retailers, brands and wholesalers to manufacturers and makers globally.
And my name is Jack Stratton. I'm director of Insider Trends. We are a global retail trend spotting agency helping brands to spot what's coming next.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us today on Honest Not Perfect. My name's Susanna Ellingham, I'm the Director of Source Events, Source Fashion, Source Home and Gift, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Stuart Trevor, who in a very illustrious career has not only founded All Saints, had long tenured design roles at Reiss, but has also started a new trailblazing fashion brand called Stuart Trevor, which is all around making fashion without producing any clothes from new. And we're going to find out a little bit more about his journey and also this really innovative, fascinating business model that everybody I talk to wants to know more about as well. So, Stuart, we'll start probably at the beginning, but thank you again for joining us today. I think one of the aims with our podcast is to share very honest conversations on people's journeys. And I think you've got so much to share, so thank you. Going back to the beginning, and we were talking about this earlier, where did your passion for design start?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So, from a very young age, I discovered David Bowie. I know a lot of people in creative world were inspired by Bowie. I remember very clearly as a little boy in growing up in Dundee, one-parent family, single mum, 4 kids, no money whatsoever, going to my Auntie Joyce's house in Broughty Ferry and hearing the words to this song on an old antique teak, well, it was a sort of like 60s teak sideboard stereo centre, and going over and listening with my ear to the thing and listening to the words and I know that bit very clearly. I remember asking my mum, but when I recall it, it's so funny because I can imagine this little Scottish boy going, "Mum, who's David Bowie?" My mum said, "Oh, well, let's go home and watch him on Top of the Pops." And he came on, and I was transfixed. He just looked otherworldly. The words were of something totally different than anything I'd heard before. And I just thought, I want to be this guy. I want to be David Bowie. And I drove my mum insane to get a pair of red boots that he was wearing on Top of the Pops. And I only know this because my brothers and sisters have taken the piss at me all my life. Because she got the boots, saved up, got the boots, and I polished them every day and slept with them under my pillow because I was so obsessed with these red boots. But we had no money whatsoever. My mother was an average churchgoer, Mormon church. People laugh, but there was 2 in Dundee. It's very popular. Think, where there is no money or whatever, that a lot of people around the world, they get very much into their church, and they were really good. They used to have wealthy families there, and the only clothes that we ever got as kids were hand-me-downs from other people in my mum's church, and that would be the highlight of my life, would be getting a box or a suitcase full of old clothes, and I would take them out and go, Mum, look at these. It was really weird. The Bay City Rollers were about 1978. I would have been, was it 78 or 70? No, 75, and I would have been about 9 years old, and they had the trousers that tartan down the side, and I was going, Mum, can I get, I didn't realise they were like a year out of date, really, but my mum taught me to sew, to put pleats on them, taking an old man's or a man's pair of trousers in to fit a wee boy, and so all that was kind of like the very early stages, and then I was customising school uniforms, printing off T-shirts. I went to Selfridges. I moved to London when I was 11. My mother married my stepfather, and I went to an all-boys school with a school uniform, and we used to customise it back then. And I used to love. So I had sweatshirts that I'd got from Selfridges, and they had a machine that could print your name on the back, and I got him to write the Royal Moi or something. There was a kid in our school called Paul Clutterbuck, and he used to call himself, the Royal Moi, and I kind of thought it was funny that, so I had a couple of sweatshirts made for us, and I wrote it on the back. I remember being in school, always being disruptive, because I'm pretty severe ADHD. I didn't realise it until recently, but talking too much, disturbing the other kids, so they'd make me sit at the front, and I would, get up and take my blazer off, and it would have it written on the back, and the school master everyone would be laughing. The master, the teacher would be going, "What's going on? What's going on?" And it, for some reason, they never realised that I had a sweatshirt on, a crew neck sweatshirt instead of a V-neck jumper.
Yeah.
I think they weren't really aware. No one was aware of fashion back in those days, and no one. My kids are slightly older now, but when they went through secondary school, high school, whatever it is, they're so strict about the uniform. It's unbelievable. But I think it's because in the last 20 years, with the rise of fast fashion and tons of people, there's access to so many clothes. Of course, kids
People
try
can
and
get
break the
exactly
rules.
what they want.
Yeah, they can. There's millions of things available, isn't there? Yeah.
I think what's interesting there is I feel like maybe we've come full circle, because you started with that love of make do and make something unique out of what was already there. And that's where potentially you've restarted and came back with Stuart Trevor. And I think that's quite interesting, that what really sparked that love for fashion is what you're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, so I realised when I was about 19, I ended up going to technical college, doing A-level fashion. I did a tailoring course in the evening with a Royal Huntsman tailor, learned how to do all the basting, all the stitches that needed for proper tailoring, pattern cutting, and masterclass in sewing. And then I ended up doing a degree in fashion. And then while I was at university, I won all these competitions like the Smirnoff Fashion Awards and a Paul Smith Mont Blanc competition and the Student Menswear Design Awards. And
So just a few.
yeah, I was, you know what it was? They were going to kick me out after the first year because I really messed around the first year at uni, drinking, having fun, and they were going to kick me out. And I said, listen, I promise you I'll knuckle down and I'll work really hard. And I ended up working 12, 14-hour days preparing, because I knew that I knew I had a talent, and I knew that I could do something. I was very creative from a very young age, and this was my big chance, and I didn't want to blow it. And during the second year, I won every competition there was, and I ended up going to work. I was offered internships at Paul Smith, and I ended up going to Reese, because basically he rang the university 14 times until I agreed to go and meet him. And during the meeting, he gave me an envelope with £500 in it and a ticket to Italy to go to Pitti Uomo in Florence. And we went there and we got on so well. And there was a funny sort of thing where he asked me on the way there, what's the big look? And I had no idea, sitting on a plane going... But I just described what somebody really cool, that an external tutor that come into the college was wearing. He had trousers with little zips in, monkey boots, a hoodie. The funny thing about the hoodie is we're talking 1985, 1986, 85. A hoodie hadn't been invented. No one, the hoodie's the number one garment in the world now. No one knew what a hoodie was. So I was describing a cardigan. But it's not made from knitwear. It's sort of like a sweatshirt, but it's got a hood and little strings and a zip, and it has like a pocket, like a kangaroo pocket, and but it has knitted ribs on the cuff and round the hem. And David was like, "Whoa, it sounds great." And I was also talking about Max with a patch pocket on it, a little tab collar, and a baseball cap with a number on it. I didn't realise at that time I was describing a New York Mets NY cap.
Yeah.
But we landed in Florence. I remember him going upstairs in the hotel saying, right, we're going to go shopping in a minute. Wandering around the courtyard thinking, well, at least I got a trip to Italy out of it. Because I thought he's going to find out. I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. And we went shopping, and all the latest designers had all the latest clothes in the shops. And it was baseball caps with numbers on. It was Macs with little tabs. It was trousers with zips. And the hoodie, there was knitted versions, like proper knitwear, hoodie, like... And we bought all this stuff, and all of a sudden I'm 18, 19 years old, wandering around Florence with designer bags. I'd never been abroad in my life. I'd never stayed at a posh hotel. I'd never eaten in a fine restaurant. We were having lunch at the Savoy or the Grand Hotel, whatever. I can't remember. I was just thinking, God, this is amazing. And he was like, he loved it. And when we went back to the hotel, he rang downstairs and he went, can I send up a bottle of champagne? Make it 2 and some of them little nibbles. And he put the phone down. He said, 1 minute. And I was out on the courtyard overlooking the Duomo. It was really, really beautiful. And I was a little bit, in awe of how I'd managed to get myself in this place. Still at college, still in the second year of a degree, still a kid, very young kid. And he rang the head of retail at Reiss back in London. They had 14 shops then or something. And he's like, this boy's a genius. He's got it all right. You won't believe it. He knew all the looks in advance. But, and he was the champagne and everything. And so I ended up, he actually bought me a red Gaultier jacket that all the pop stars were wearing from a shop called Luisa Via Roma. It was about 800 quid. And he said to me, basically, if I buy you that jacket, will you tell Paul Smith to fuck off? And I said, I thought there's no way he's going to buy that jacket. It's equivalent of £10,000 nowadays. I said, if you buy me that jacket, I'll tell him to fuck off. And he went to the shop and I tried it on, and it was skin tight round here with the big shoulders, really, really incredible, bright red wool gabardine. Gaultier was the world's #1 menswear designer at the time. And all the pop, ABC were wearing it, and
it's that iconic piece.
Oh, it was, yeah, totally. I mean, that jacket opened doors all over the world because he bought me it. He should have seen him with a credit card. He was shaking, giving it to the people to pay. But he said, "You sure you'll tell him? You'll tell him?" And I'm like, "I'll tell him." And so he bought the jacket, and then I ended up working with him for 10 years. And during that period, he just gave me complete carte blanche. But I learned during that period that the best designers in the world, and one of them at that period was Helmut Lang, and then Prada came out, and designers like that, all they ever did was take vintage military and they'd take it to factories and get them to copy it and do it into slightly more luxurious fabrics or something. And so I realised over the years, because I would find these warehouses with all this stock of vintage military, and denim designers, they all look for vintage Levi jackets or vintage Lee or vintage Wrangler and copy them. So in the old days, all of that that was what we used to use to get the creative juices flowing. When I started Stuart Trevor, my new brand, which was inspired by what about a clothing brand that doesn't produce any clothing? It was take all of those, these warehouses they've got 1 million garments in them. Yeah. I can go there, pick out these garments and cut out the middleman. So I no longer give it to a factory and ask them to copy the pattern and find a fabric that looks similar and replicate it and order 500 or 1,000 pieces. What used to get the creative juices flowing now is the creative juice. And that's what we do.
And I think going back to that, obviously, going back to the point that you made around, it sounded like David just gave you a lot of creative freedom.
Well, it wasn't easy. In the beginning, basically Reiss, when I went there, was a multi-brand retail store. Primarily, David was really good at suits. He used to work with like 1 or 2 factories and some of the best fabric mills in the world, like, Cerruti and Barberis. And we would fly into Milan and go up to Biella and buy fabric from them. But I discovered that they all had dead stock fabric that they didn't know what to do with. So I by inquisitive mind, ADHD, going, well, what's all that? And they'd be going, oh, casino, this is all this stuff we don't know what to do with. So I ended up making them an offer. David Rees, of course, loved it because we were getting £20 a metre cloth for £2 a metre as long as we took loads of it. So I would get a list of, 100 rolls of 50 metres of, fabric. And, sometimes it was only 50 metres, sometimes it was 100, sometimes. And I asked the mill, like, do you know where I can make a 4-button single-breasted blazer, maybe waistcoat, 3-piece suit? And they gave me a factory down in the south of Italy, and this was before, obviously, Google Maps or anything like that. And we had to get the map out and look at where Castelmaggiore is, and I'd get in the car and go, right, David, let's get on the motorway, and we'd do a 5-hour journey down to this fabric mill. And we'd put things into work. It'd be a factory that was making all the Armani production or whatever, and we would put things into work. But yeah, from a very young age, in the beginning, David was like, he sort of allowed me to test the waters like that. And as long as I would do something really boring that he liked. And what would happen is the minute that the 4-button single-breasted with the 3-piece waistcoat and trousers turned up and sold out in a day, he kind of said, actually, maybe I should just
leave you be.
Let him do it, sort of thing. So it was luck and a little bit of talent, but he basically, I mean, his business was basically bankrupt at the time, so they were going through an administration. So to have this young kid come along with loads of ideas and loads of energy and come out, and I was also like, David, we need to stop buying from all these other brands because the margins, I'll design it all. He's like, and we'll show it in Paris. Let's take it to Paris and we'll sell it to, Barney's New York. And he's like, oh, don't be stupid. They won't let us show in Paris. That's for real designers. I'm like, I am a real designer, David.
And bearing in mind you'd had it sounds like a fair bit of creative freedom, and rightly so. How difficult was it for you to leave that environment and start upon your own?
I don't know. The arrogance of youth, I always say. I don't know. If I look back on it now, why on earth I decided to give up a job earning, at 28 years old, earning 80 grand a year, talking about, shares in the business. I decided to give it all up to do my own thing. I had a Chinese manufacturer that used to make for Paul Smith and Armani and Stone Island and Ralph Lauren and Donna Karan. All their designers used to love what I'd done for Rees. And the owner was like, why don't you come and work with us? We're doing 10 million a year in the UK. We'll give you 10%. And I was like, my maths isn't very good. I was like, you're going to give me £1 million to come and work with you? And they're like, yeah, we'll give you 10%. And I'm like, if you've got all that money, well, I've got a business plan. And I showed them this business plan for All Saints. And they just went, let's go. So I put together a collection. I went to this warehouse full of vintage military, and I got patterns made, and I made flak jackets and parkas and bomber jackets and combat pants, and I made them in moleskin, and I made them in nylon, and I put them all on a back wall in Paris with a nail, because I couldn't afford mannequins, and I dressed them like a parka with a T-shirt underneath and the combat pants under, and we wrote something like £1 million in the first weekend at a show with all the buyers from all the best stores in the world, including Louisa Via Roma, who I bought that red Gaultier jacket from. They all came by, and and that was All Saints. That just
All
went
Saints born.
Yeah, but then we had to deliver it. So and fortunately, because I had the Chinese factory doing the production, I had the funding and the ability to be able to get it produced and delivered, and we did it, and it just went off. I mean, it took 10 years really for All Saints to get anywhere near towards the look of it that it is now. We were doing. I mean, but we did go from like 2 million a year to 4 million to 8 million to 10 to. It just.
So it's organic, steady growth.
It was, yeah. We never borrowed any money back in those days. No one was willing to lend huge amounts of money to anyone. There were no investors or whatever. Nowadays, you can, speak to investors, and there's lots of people out there that will give you, if you have come, with my new concept, I just put the word out. Part of the reason I started it is it's Stuart Trevor we're talking about now. Sorry, moving swiftly on.
I think what I'd love to know is what your motivation was for starting this, because it sounds like you've always been aware of the opportunity in dead stock and this opportunity around reuse. And I think we both know, it's a well-labelled stat, about 40 to 50% of all clothes never actually hit the shop floor. They sit in warehouses. So there's always been this kind of thing we don't really ever talk about, which is what happens to things that aren't sold, where do they go? And we know that it's a big issue within fashion. So it sounds like you've always been aware that there's a creative opportunity for there, but what made you start Stuart Trevor about a year ago?
So I'd been, with All Saints, I used to, when I owned it, when I ran it, which I exited in 2007, because basically I had two partners that sold out to one guy, the ex-husband of Karen Millen. He wanted to move all the production to China, and I didn't want to. I used to make about 40% in the UK with British fabric mills, generally dead stock fabric that I could acquire for, the margins were great as well. But the main thing for me, I've always had this thing about waste.
Yeah.
I'm always had this thing about how much, every time you go to the supermarket, how much plastic there is with everything. I hated it. So I used to go to farmers markets and buy everything in paper bags, because it actually works out cheaper than buying and better than buying it in a supermarket. So in the same with fashion, about 5 or 6 years ago, started working with young startup businesses that approached me. I was mentoring different brands like The Circle, who they encourage women to empty out their wardrobe, send them, designer clothes that they don't wear anymore, and they resell them. And when I met the founder, one of the co-founders, I gave them advice. I was like, every single brand in the world has more stock than they know what to do with. They've got warehouses full of it. The only way that you can make money is partner up with one of these women's wear brands that are really, really cool. They will give you access to stock with sizes, because, it's all right having snowflakes, like, single items of one really lovely jacket from, I don't know, Sandro or Marge or M&M. But if you could go to one of those and you could get a small, a medium, a large, an X, or an 8, a 6, an 8, a 10, a 14, then you've got more chance of the business becoming successful. I was mentoring another brand called Fanfare Label, which takes denim, vintage denim, and upcycles it, adds fabric to it, or cuts them up and reshapes them. And Esther is a really talented young lady who was ex Vivienne Westwood, and I really enjoyed working with them. But I learned so much around statistics, such as every 7 minutes there's a pile of clothes the height of Mount Everest going into landfill. If the fashion industry were a country or behind the third in carbon emissions behind China and USA. All these shocking statistics. And I was introducing these people to investors, and these investors were like, yeah, they're great. Why don't you do another brand? I used to love All Saints. I used to love Reese, but I've gone right off it, mass market and everything. I love what you're wearing. I'm like, this is vintage. They're like, I've never seen any vintage like that. Can I buy that off you? And I'm like, I realised what a project I'd started doing with my daughters over lockdown was, making these sort of patches and putting them onto bomber jackets. And I was selling them to friends, a bit like when I was at school doing the sweatshirts with, the Royal Moi or people's names on it and things, customizing things like that. And I all these investors was like, I think after the 10th time, I went away and I thought, what about a clothing brand that doesn't produce any clothes? So I went back to these investors and they're like, I'm in, 100 grand. Where do I sign? What the do you mean?
But I think you're one of the first brands that I've learnt about, not to say there aren't others out there, that's just come straight out and said, we're going to create fashion without creating any new clothes.
Yeah.
And actually to stick by that, we hear quite a lot from people how difficult it is to to really deal with that end of life of fashion. And fashion is hugely polluting and damaging. And I think what's interesting is that hopefully when you do look back in that long, you'll see, much like we were talking about earlier with the people that you mentor and that you work with, that you've sparked an idea in other designers that this is possible, that you can create businesses like this that are special, but are also minimising the carbon footprint of fashion.
Yeah, I mean, we encourage I've been doing a lot of talking in the last, well, we started about a year ago, just over a year and a half ago now. And halfway through, I was thinking, God, they must have heard this before, whatever, people. But you know what? Every single time I'd give a talk, people come up to me and after, I had no idea. Yeah. And I realised that they, you know, and everybody spends their whole life now. You get on the tube, nobody's reading the paper. They're all just sat there like this, looking
the endless
at their
scroll.
phone. And the phone is just, we're inundated with bullshit nowadays. It's huge billion-dollar corporations, and they're brainwashing us into believing that we don't have enough. There's, you know, advert after. I remember Facebook and Instagram when it first came out, whatever, and you look at it on your phone, and you'd be looking at all your friends' things. Now, every second or third thing is an advert from someone, especially this shitters like Shein and Temu and all that, and all these other fast fashion brands trying to sell us something that we don't need. And people have been brainwashed into buying stuff that they've all got a wardrobe full of clothes they don't need, and then they're like, oh, you know, I could get 2 T-shirts for a tenner or what, you know, and it's sad.
We were talking about this earlier. It's like we're never going to have a problem with people buying things.
No,
like people are going to buy. The question is how do we get them to buy better?
Well, this is it. So I set up my new brand, Stuart Trevor. There are things in there. We started out with vintage T-shirts and we printed some interesting things on it, things that I love. That, you know, influenced me. There's a John Lennon inspired print. There's a David Bowie inspired print or whatever. And then I realised though that so many people came back to me and said, I'd love that T-shirt, but I would never buy a T-shirt that someone's been sweating in for 20 years. You know, you're going to have to find a more sustainable source. So we found someone that's making T-shirts from 50% recycled cotton and 50% organic GOTS certified cotton. And we realised that that's probably the most sustainable that you're going to get. I'm not asked to create, you know, produce 500 pieces of a colour. I don't have to hold 500 pieces in stock. I can send off and order 2 pieces or 4 pieces or 6 pieces. And if I, you know, get ordered, put them on a website and sell them, I can order every day, you know, 1s or 2s or whatever from somebody that's already made stock. And I'm not going to stop that person from making stock because they've got, you know, they're doing the Ed Sheeran tour 2 months ago or whatever. They need to produce 150,000 black T-shirts. Thankfully, someone like Ed Sheeran's making them from 50% recycled cotton and 50% organic cotton.
So at least already existing. It's just how do we use it?
Yeah. So that's what kind of where we're doing it. The rest of it is we you know, from what I'm doing, I'm going to these warehouses. I'm finding this vintage military. I've got people that. There are warehouses full of denim. There are warehouses, if you want black shirts, you can contact them and you get, they come in different sizes. They're not all the same brand or whatever, but we generally take their label out and put our label in it. We relabel everything. But there's no limit to the amount of stock that we can get.
I was going to say, do you think there's a general lack of awareness around this dead stock within fashion and how it can be reused or repurposed? Do you think it's in the buyer's mindset that it has to be new,
I had, so a year ago I had...
People thought you were insane.
They thought I was insane. They were coming to me going, how are you going to scale it? Where are you going to get the stock? I'm like, the last thing anyone needs to worry about is where I'm going to get stock from. The biggest issue was, how am I going to market it? How am I going to find enough people that want to buy and pay slightly more for something that we've had to spend quite a few hours creating something new? My sales have gone ballistic in the last month alone. We're now, every single morning I wake up, there's 20, 30 different people have ordered something. So there is a new demographic of people that are I mean, you told me over lunch that you made a vow 6 months, a year ago, never to buy new clothes.
Not buying new clothes this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. You should do it from now on. Don't buy anything new. You don't need it. I mean, we also talked about, well, we don't want to put people out of business. The problem is, that's not the mission. We're not here to try and put people out of business. We're here to try and get these bigger corporations to stop buying tons and tons of shit and force feeding it to us. We want them to start looking at, maybe they should cut their overheads down, and maybe they should think about buying more sustainably. Maybe they should look at doing all their T-shirts made from recycled cotton and 100% and organic GTS certified
I think
cotton.
the conversation is never about putting people out of business. Well, unless there's one or two businesses that we could talk about. I think the reality.
Well, not mention any of your names, but like the Boohoos and Shein and Temu. Yeah, I'd love it to see these people going out of business, because I don't think there's anything positive about anything that they do.
And that's where I was going. I think it's not about putting people out of business. I think it's about trying to help people work in different ways.
Yes.
And build an awareness around actually what is possible. One of the biggest conversations I have with various different brands, wholesalers, retailers, is around the education gap within the buying community. That they come in and this is the way we do it and this is the way we do it. And that flexibility to think outside the box and go, actually, we could go and look at dead stock, or what's in our warehouse that could go to a UK factory that could be made into something new and brought back into our stock.
So I was speaking with several suppliers and several brands about that, because they all have stock. A lot of them have, when you first start speaking to them and then they go, let me get back to you. And they come back and they go, we've got a warehouse in Manchester that apparently about 25% of it is stuff we don't even know what's in there. It's just been sitting there for 10, 15 years. That's where we get our bomber jackets from. Yeah. They're from the 80s. They've been sitting in warehouses for, that length of time. Nobody wanted them. We're kind of bringing it. And it's kind of funny because I always loved bomber jackets, those vintage military type. The sort of things that, I think in the 90s, it was only bouncers at nightclubs that wore them. But now, we get hold of them. It is, yeah. And it's kind of interesting because, and the most important, and I have to stress this, I'm not angry about any of it. I'm trying to make all of this fun. I want it to be, because it is fun. It's fun taking existing stock and doing something creative with it. And people also say, because I'm a designer, my number one, the biggest thing that I wanted to do was go to the best fabric mills in the world and look at the newest innovation in fabric design and buy from it and create beautiful collections. Well, I'm not doing that now. What I'm doing is I've given myself such strict limitations that I can't do that. I just have to go and see what I can find and then what can I do with it. I mean, that's kind of like, that really makes you work harder as a creative. And I think that's how people like Vivienne Westwood and Paul Smith and Catherine Hamnett in the 80s and 90s, they had to work within limitations because they didn't have Alexander McQueen. They couldn't just go and order 500 meters of a color of a fabric. They had to find someone who had stock of it and use up that stock. And that's what made them more creative. And it makes me more creative.
I think one of the interesting things, which I don't think many people know is coming through next year, is some of the legislative changes coming with greenwashing claims through the CMA. And what I found super interesting about this is, up until now, somebody could make a claim and there was not really a huge amount of pushback on it. It's like, well, if you're going to go through and you're going to be enforced, it's a long process. As of next year, if the CMA finds you guilty of greenwashing, they can instantly fine you. And I think the figure is up to 10% of your global revenues. No longer will need to go through a judicial procedure. But what I find super interesting about this particularly is it's not just about what you say, it's how you present an overall product. Are you using green? Are you giving the impression that it's sustainable? And it's looking at colour, language, not just the materials and what's said. And I think that is probably one of the more positive things that the CMA are trying to do, because nobody's tackling greenwashing. And I think what's happening is consumers are losing all faith in everything that they see and tarring a lot of brands with the same brush. And I think some companies, some retailers are moving forward in the right direction. But I feel that when that comes through next year, I think that's an interesting way now. It's not just about the language. It's about how you present everything around it. And that will make these people think differently about it, I think.
I'm not holding my breath. I mean,
I don't know. I'd love to see a big
I'd
enforcement.
love to see it happen. Well, I had a presentation on a panel last week, and there was a kid from a lovely guy from Pangaea, and he said he was really, really, uplifted because he saw that Ferrero Rocher have changed their packaging to a sustainable pack. I went, fucking hell, mate, this is archetypal greenwashing. Do you honestly believe Ferrero Rocher? There's nothing sustainable about that company. They're just using sustainability to try and sell us more of their shit. And it's, it's full of chemicals. It's super highly processed food that's really, really bad for us. And they're all trying to jump on the bandwagon of, what's trending? Sustainability's trending. Let's say that all our polyester comes from fishing nets, discarded fishing nets that we've collected from the seas and all that. I go on these stands in Pitti Uomo in Florence with huge Italian corporations that say huge signs everywhere saying we're the most sustainable in the world because everything we do comes from discarded fishing nets. It's bullshit. They're like $1 billion business making 100 million nylon puffer jackets and things like that. There's no way it all comes from fishing nets. It's all made from oil and gas. It's another form of greenwashing. There's so much of it. And the worst bit is that these oil and gas companies pay people to come on and challenge people like me.
And we were talking about this earlier because obviously even just listening to this conversation, people will have a sense that you've always looked to reuse and waste is pretty abhorrent. So, and the new business that you have, Stuart Trevor, is really been built with the right values in mind from the start. So when somebody comes and criticises what you're doing, that must be interesting.
Oh, I find it hilarious. And somebody came back when I first launched it and said, I'm sorry, but, a clothing brand that doesn't produce any clothes, you're lying. And I'm like, I'm sorry, why? What are you talking about? Well, you said that you're never going to produce any clothing. I said, no, I didn't. I said that the business was founded on a question. What about a clothing brand that doesn't produce any clothes? That was a light bulb moment. And I went to investors and said, what about that? And then I realized that as I'm doing all these garments and I'm adding patches on things that I've found, other people's waste, the factory they were begging me for work. They couldn't afford to pay the wages. They said, listen, we've got all this dead stock fabric under the cutting table. It's been sitting there for 20 years. Why don't we do like a shirt jacket or whatever? So I ordered 100 shirt jackets and they made them and we paid them and it was, I think, December last year, they could pay their staff Christmas bonus sort of thing. And then they were, so you do produce things. I said, I never said I wasn't going to produce things. If I come across a factory in London that has dead stock fabric and loads of really talented tailors and I want to help them stay in business, I will do everything in my capabilities to help people survive, people like that. Because it's, I want good things to happen. So, I think it's everybody, and I cannot believe that someone who works in sustainability or has a retail company that doesn't produce any clothing could try and criticize me. I'm like, why don't you save any sort of criticism and anger that you might have towards someone that deserves it rather than me? But anyway, I it's all water off a duck's back.
But I think there's a culture of challenging claims, and sometimes you think, are you challenging the right people?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people. But I challenge myself every day. I try to make sure that I am that every single thing that I do, is as clean and as straightforward as I can, as far as the most sustainable processes. So and I've been told again and again that we're the first people in their mind that have ever closed the whole loop. Mm-hmm. So what we do, because we encourage people, every time I meet anyone, I'm going to ask you afterwards, if you've got loads of stuff in your wardrobe you don't wear, put it in a suitcase, come and visit me in my studio. And I got, guys that bring me, I had one guy brought me a suitcase with about 20 Savile Row, Richard James Savile Row suits, and I swapped them. All he wanted was one of these parkas and one of the shirts. We do a shirt that has the back cut out with the sequins on it. We call it a party back shirt because it's business at the front and party at the back. We were going to call it the mullet and all that, but we just thought we'd go straight for the party.
But what
back.
a great customer relationship that is. And it is closing that loop. It's people bringing you things that are still good quality that they aren't using, and they get to walk away with one great thing that they love.
Love it. I mean, this guy, this several people, they come in and they're like, I've been watching your social media and I'm on your new. I love what you're doing, and I'm thinking, I promise not to buy anything. If I bring you a load of stuff, I'm right. Bring it on. Bring me a load of stuff because I'm always looking, and the whole model is based around taking other people's waste. So now I have brands that come to me and they have 5,000 puffer jackets that they don't know what to do with. That people returned them. They've got holes in them. So we take from brands, we take from people, we take dead stock fabric. We have T-shirts that we do, as we say, are made from 50% recycled cotton and 50% organic GOTS certified cotton. We make things like that, but then and then we're making tiny. I mean, we've only really ever done one production. No, we made a skirt again as well. We made this full Durandal sort of skirt out of dead stock fabric. I'm trying to work out a few other pieces of women's wear because there's so much. There's millions and millions and millions of meters.
You want those classic pieces that will just last forever.
And that's the idea as well, is if I do something and I sign it and date it and number it, people are going to wear it for life. When I started All Saints, the number one word in my mind was longevity. And there are things that I designed 20, 30 years ago. There's a biker jacket. It's still their number one bestseller.
I'm going to fully admit, I have one of those biker jackets. It's about 10 years old and it still looks as good now as it did then, and it's going to last forever.
If I had £1 for every one of those biker jackets, I'd be a millionaire.
Or close. So I have one last question, because I think we've covered quite a bit of ground. And it's probably one that means something different, but where do you see the future of fashion? What do you think will drive it in a different direction, or will it ever go in a different direction?
Well, it has gone. It's a huge difference to when I started, because when I started, it was all about desperately trying to get department stores like Selfridges to buy from you, or independent retailers. Well, all the independent retailers have gone, and a lot of it, people try and blame it on huge billionaire corporations like, Flannels putting them out of business. They never put them out of business. It's landlords that have put them out of business. What happened is that right the way across the country, there are swathes of retail streets and companies like Prudential, all the pension companies, pension funds, bought up huge swathes of property and the Crown Estate and loads of it in central London. And they overpaid for those prices because, property prices keep going up or whatever. And they thought, it doesn't matter. They don't care if half the shops are empty because some mug will come along like, Starbucks or Five Guys and they'll pay £2 million or £1 million or £500,000 for a shop on that street. As long as they're getting one idiot paying stupid amounts of money, then they'll do pop-ups for other people with that. But then the pension funds, the big problem with them is people are living longer. When we were younger, people were dying off at 70. Now they're living to 90, 100. So they're having to pay pensions for longer. So they're having to earn some money out of it somehow. And so that's kind of killed the high street as well. And then there are the councils paying. I got offered retail stores in Piccadilly Circus underneath the lights. They offered me them 2 years rent free, but I needed to speak to the council about rates. So I spoke to them and I got the Minister for the Environment on the phone and I got the Westminster Council and we had a Zoom call about it, and I was working with a charity called Resurgo who take kids from a disadvantaged background and we were going to kids that thought about suicide, that thought there's no way on earth I'm ever going to get a job, I don't know what to do. I was going to train them into a life of retail and show them that it can be fun. We were going to have tailors and artists painting on the back of jackets and sewing patches on and have lots of fun.
What a great retail experience that would be.
It would be incredible. And these kids would really enjoy it and go away. We'd obviously have really, really good managers overseeing it. So Westminster and the Westminster Council and the Minister for Environment said, OK, we'll give you 50% rates relief. I'm like, are you aware of how much the rates on that building are? We've no idea. It's £650,000. Well, there you go. You've got 50% off. I'm like, so you want me to come up with £350,000 a year to open a shop there? You do realise Piccadilly Circus is not really a retail area, so I'm not really going to take any money. It's more of an experience and get these kids, like it's almost charity work like that. Well, if you were a charity, you could have it rates free. And I'm like, God, they just don't get it, do they?
Yeah, I think when we speak to retailer, every single retailer that has a physical store says they're disadvantaged against online only and against some of the much larger retail groups that are outside of the UK. And when they say how much their rent is and their rates, I kind of just scratch my head and think, I don't understand how you make a profit and a living. Like, how do you do it?
I mean, I'm looking at retail stores for myself to open up some experiential sort of thing where we put bands on and we have drinks and we have artists and we have what we wanted to create is something a bit like Andy Warhol's factory, but without the heroin, where we'd have artists and bands and it's almost impossible. I mean, if you find anywhere, so for the moment, we just have to stick with doing. Well, I'm very fortunate. I own a building in Shoreditch, Hoxton. It's a really, really cool. It's a beautiful loft space. We invite people to come to it. We have open events. We have a party every month. Everyone's welcome. Turn up, you get a free drink, you can bring a suitcase full of clothes that you don't wear.
Maybe we could do an event with us. We can do a collaboration between us and our audience.
I'd love to,
definitely
get. Yeah, bring them
there we go.
There.
Anyone listening, we'll put a date out, we'll sort something out.
OK, that's great. It's in Fanshawe Street in Hoxton. It's just off Oxon Square. You can email me. Go on stuarttrevor.com and sign up, and you get a newsletter with invites to parties as well.
Yeah.
But I would love to do a collaboration with you. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we could definitely do something. I think for us, one of the things that we really hope these conversations do is either just make somebody think a little bit differently about something they're already doing, or also just open their eyes to what retail could be, or what the future of retail could look like, or what those different experiences are. And if some of these larger brands or even the wholesalers or some of the fantastic retailers we do work with took a little bit of inspiration, like, it would have huge impacts.
I think impact is all about having a positive social and environmental impact. That last thing I was going to mention is that, when I keep telling about bring your suitcase, because not enough people do it. If we were never to produce another garment again, we could go 8-9 generations. That's like,
wow.
What's that? Something like 200 years.
Were you telling me earlier that
without producing another garment, there's enough clothing to go round? They reckon that there's 150 billion garments a year in production in the world at the moment. That's about 20 for every human being on the planet, including kids in Africa that parents can't afford to feed them or whatever. It is abhorrent. And I don't know, every 7 minutes a pile of clothes at height of Mount Everest going into landfill. I showed that to my daughter when I was preparing a deck for my new business. She went, Dad, you can't lie. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, it's not a lie. I said, it's not a lie. She went, don't be stupid, Dad. If that was the truth, no kid on the planet would ever buy from fast fashion or super brands ever again. They'd only ever wear vintage. So I showed her the facts and she went, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to start a clothing brand that doesn't produce any clothing. She was like, wow, it's just, it's gobsmacking.
And I think and hopefully we'll talk about this more in the future, I think closing the loop and that end of life of what do we do? Not only we tend to think in terms of clothes that have been worn, had end of life, what do we do then? And I think some of the questions are actually, it's not just that, but what do we do with some of the stuff that's already been produced, not even sold and worn?
Yeah.
It's like there's a huge market opportunity.
That's what we're based around doing. The one thing that I forgot to mention when you were talking about the regulations that are coming in, what we need is an end-of-life tax. We need something where if something does, because at the moment they get away with just getting rid of, there's a statistics that came out yesterday that are saying that all these, oil and gas companies and plastic producers like Coca-Cola, they all signed up to recycle and take up 100 million tons of plastic. Apparently they're producing something like 3,000 million tons of plastic. So this was just a distraction from what they're continuing to do. What they need to do is stop producing, stop putting everything in plastic. Go back to glass bottles or whatever. It must be, or cans or what. But the problem is with cans, they have plastic liners inside the cans.
I think it's always a question for me that I feel like the future of it's kind of like going back to the future. It's like looking at those deposit return schemes, getting the local infrastructure ready throughout the country to be able to do that so that we are recycling. But I think we're a long way away from getting back to that stage in this country.
We have a sweatshirt that we're launching next season with "The future is in the past."
Yeah.
And that's a strapline because, we need to go back to a period, the old days
where you could survive with less.
Yes. Well, we had less, didn't we? I mean, I somebody stopped me in Cannes when I was giving a talk there, and they asked me to talk, and I don't know where it came from, but I just said, when I was a kid, we had favourites. We had, if you think about it yourself, remember when you had a favourite jumper and a favourite pair of trousers? You wore it to death. Your favourite pair of shoes, favourite leather jacket. You only had one, but it was your favourite. You maybe had one that was not so good that you would wear to go kicking a football around. But then when you were going somewhere, you'd have your favourite. Why don't we go back to when we had favourites? Wasn't that?
Maybe that's your next range.
Yeah.
We're
going to call it
all
favourites.
of our favourites.
Well, yeah, but we also ask people, bring us your favourites and we will upcycle them. We will repair them or, do something to them to make them, we can even make things slightly bigger or whatever. So if everyone puts on weight, we're all on a diet, we're all trying to lose weight, whatever, get back to. But you can actually do things to make garments bigger or whatever. Why don't we go back to favourites though? Wouldn't that be nice? That's the future.
Wearing
of
your
fashion.
favourite clothes all the time.
Yeah,
seems like a dream.
It does.
On that positive note, Stuart, thank you so much. I've loved talking to you, and hopefully the people who are listening to the episode will love listening just as much as I have.
I hope you've got a good editor because I've been rabbiting away non-stop.
Don't you worry.
It's been lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, bye.